It is December 4th, 2025, and we are continuing to keep an eye on the situation surrounding Venezuela as you have President Nicolás Maduro confirming that he did, in fact, have a phone call with US President Trump. Now, what was said on that call? Maduro described it as cordial, said he wasn't going to go into the details. This, of course, comes as you have reports here in the West that Trump used the call to threaten Maduro to tell him to flee the country. But what do we actually know about what happened, and what should we be keeping in mind when it comes to all of this information that is being spread across social media, especially when it comes to a situation like the one in Venezuela, where you have the US desperate for a regime change war, but trying to figure out if there is any way to move forward without a complete disaster? Well, we got into all of that and more with a special guest earlier, so let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is Camila Escalante, an independent journalist and editor for Kawsachun News. Camila, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Thanks for the invite. Nice to see you.
Yeah, it's great to have you on the show again. Now, I want to get your take on the latest here as we have Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro confirming that he spoke on the phone with President Trump late last month and describing the call as cordial, saying, quote, "I don't like diplomacy with microphones. When there are important matters, they must be handled quietly until they are resolved." Now, this comes amid reports in the West that Trump used the call to threaten Maduro by telling him that he and his family had just 1 week to flee the country. So, how do you view the current state of tensions and kind of this back and forth here?
Well, so it was supposed to have been about 10 days ago or 10 days before he announced it, live, televised in his late afternoon, early evening appearance, where he's always visiting communes, making announcements, doing things like talking about the different missions and ministries and what's going on in the country. And so he talked about it very casually. He brought it up after this period. And so, that like what he's disclosing is, all he can disclose. I'm sure that they say things that we never find out about. He's very aware that the entire country's watching, the Venezuelan media, the international media, the White House, and everybody else. So we're not going to get a whole lot about what actually was said. But really, we know that the US had hopes of whether it was striking land targets, not to say that it's not going to happen, but they did want to do a lot more and sooner than they're doing. And it seems like they've been dissuaded out of fear that they're going to fail and the optics are going to be catastrophic for the Trump regime. The Trump regime believes that now the optics are going to be awful because they're getting so much pushback from some of the countries around the region and abroad. And even the Pope, the American Pope, actually uh, told the U.S. to not attack Venezuela to try to get rid of Maduro. So I think that they are looking for other ways to do this. And as many people have commented, it's obviously a case of Marco Rubio talking in President Trump's ear and just telling him to do the most unhinged things to try to unseat the governments of Nicaragua, Cuba, and Venezuela, taking Venezuela as the kingpin, as the leader in not only the Bolivarian Alliance, but the resistance to U.S. imperialism and neocolonialism in the Americas, but also around the global South. This is President Maduro who speaks in favor of the right for a free Palestine, the rights of Palestinians, that has closely partnered with, collaborated with Iran, with China, with Russia, which the US is well aware of, and many other countries. So the US thought that they could go in there, that the left, or whatever they think it is debilitated in Latin America, which could be true. But they are realizing that it's going to be very difficult for them to be able to achieve anything. And ultimately, Trump is trying to spin this in his favor. And so he loves the fake news that we're seeing on X and in the news headlines and whatever else, which is being generated about claims that President Maduro is preparing to board a flight to Istanbul to then flee to Iran. Then it's Qatar that he's fleeing to. Then it's the completely opposite, contradictory things are being spread. I think some of these with the knowledge of the State Department and the White House, others just these sort of like far right online influencers on their own. But they're seeing things again that are extremely contradictory. One day or one week, they were saying that breaking news, Wagner Group is arriving on planes to Venezuela to whatever it is, help Nicolas Maduro win a war against the United States. Honestly, like 2.5 days later, the headline was that Russia was abandoning Venezuela and was no longer helping. And then the next day it was that a Russian ship had pulled up to the Caribbean shore of Venezuela. So it's both. Russia is both helping and abandoning Venezuela at the same time. And so it's like impossible to follow, and it just has become a joke. I mean, X is just not a good place to get information.
Yeah, and I know Elon Musk has tried to sell it as like the number one news platform, but I'm with you. You get on there one day and it's a completely different story than what you just saw the day before. And I know that you were just in Venezuela and you were there as we had the President of the United States getting on social media and declaring that the airspace in and around the country needed to be considered closed in its entirety. And I'm looking at that and going, did Trump just declare a no fly zone? What does this actually mean for the state of things in Venezuela? So, what was your experience like there, kind of going through that and traveling through that still?
Well, I only heard about it through all the panic messages that all of my friends send me on a daily basis. So every time I'm in Venezuela, this happens, ever since things started getting very difficult there some years ago with, the sanctions and the scarcity and all the fake news surrounding Venezuela, is that you have friends like other journalists, maybe like solidarity activist type friends, just really concerned about me in Venezuela, which, by the way, is a country at peace where I'm able to walk around with my camera, with my laptop, and everything else, and I don't have any problems. I wouldn't do that in certain other countries. And so I started getting all these messages saying, like, when are you planning to leave? Are you going to be able to get a flight? Are the flights continuing? And I was like, okay, what's going on? Why are people asking me this? And then I looked it up. And so I saw that Truth Social post had just come out from Trump. And so I started asking some of my Venezuelan friends, and none of them had heard of this yet, nor did they care. They literally rolled their eyes at me because this is just another headline that is completely vague, not founded or based on anything, with potentially no way of enforcing that, a closure of Venezuelan airspace. And it's just like another one of these things that Trump is doing without any additional information in a single post. We've yet to hear, further information about what that would actually mean from his Secretary of State or his Secretary of War. So it really is just intended to, spark fear in the airlines the companies that are operating over Venezuelan airspace and around, and the neighboring countries, and dissuade people from traveling there. And of course, to make Venezuelans themselves, more miserable with the situation, because they know that they're constantly under siege and they feel as if they're not sometimes able to do things that normal people are able to do in other countries, because this is a country that is under 1,000 unilateral coercive measures and has suffered large scale, massive theft to the tune of billions and billions of dollars, stolen through the theft of Citco and Venezuelan gold. So, Venezuelans are kind of like, okay, whatever, like, that's just another headline. Like, it's always something. But so after that, I did fly home this week, and here I am. I flew from Caracas to Toronto. There were no irregular, nothing changed in the airport. All of the flights were listed on the board as normal. Of course, some airlines were banned from operating in Venezuela because they were following the US's lead just a couple weeks ago and temporarily suspending flights, which Venezuela said, you can't do that. You can't play with us that way. You either operate here and you run your flights as normal or not. And they give them 48 hours to, change their behavior and rectify, and they didn't. So those 6 airlines are banned. But when I was flying back, and I flew back on Copa, there were flights operating from Copa, from Laser, Conviasa, Wingo, and Estelar and Avior, of which I hope to be boarding soon when I return. And so things are more or less operating as normal. We're going to have to. We did see a statement that was put out by both the Colombian president and the aviation authority, the Civil Aviation Authority of Colombia, saying that they're operating as normal, the airspace is open, and they reject that the United States, which has no jurisdiction over Venezuelan airspace, is making such claims to be closing the airspace of a sovereign nation.
Yeah, it is just insane, to see Trump tweet that out. And I don't know what his expectations are, if he thinks everyone is going to just ask how high when he says jump, essentially. But that's kind of how he was presenting it. And that is not the only statement we've heard from Trump that has been just insane and bizarre, because as we talked about when you came on the show back in October, the Trump administration is not just threatening Venezuela, they're going after various countries in the region. And this week, Trump threatened to attack any country he believes is making drugs destined illegally for the US, saying, quote, if they come in through a certain country or any country, or if we think they're building mills, whether it's fentanyl or cocaine, anybody doing that and selling it into our country is subjected to attack, not just Venezuela. Okay, that was a word salad there, but I mean, we watched the US with this war on terror targeting countries across the Middle East, people across the Middle East. Now they've got this rebranded, expanded war on drugs, so to speak. Is this their way of basically telling the region we're going to keep doing whatever we want and we're looking for more and more domination? Or how do you see it?
Yeah, well, it set a very dangerous precedent that in 2020, you had these sorts of people claiming that China was essentially, gift wrapping and shipping COVID to the United States or around the world to get people sick. I don't know how you would characterize like the type of people who were saying that, if they were MAGA people. I don't remember because I was at the time, living in South America, so I wasn't really completely tuned into what, people were saying in the US. But a lot of people who I would say are supporters of Trump were just blaming China without basis for contaminating the world. And so now they're saying Venezuela, a country that has nothing to do with fentanyl, is making people sick and killing them in the United States, which doesn't make sense at all. It means you could also blame any next country. You could next say that you could say that that pick any country like Vietnam is sending boxes of donuts to the United States to give people chicken pox. And it's presumably that might stick with some people because some of the sort of conspiracy theories and rumors that are being spread are unbelievably ridiculous and far fetched. So, this all started with, within the last, I mean, and we've already covered it, but, they started designating first the Tren de Aragua as a terrorist organization. Then just recently, the Cartel de los Soles, and then saying that President Maduro and his government are leading that. I mean, that's a little bit ridiculous. Now we're trying to like make connections that don't really exist between, first of all, organized crime, but also cocaine and fentanyl and the Venezuelan government. Completely absurd. But the same week that these extrajudicial killings, these strikes began, in the Caribbean Sea, the first one being September 2nd, the book was published by these two guys who are the main people right now pushing the fringe conspiracy theory that Venezuela and President Chavez and whatever it is, Matic and now Maduro are behind the rigging of elections in more than 70 countries. That came out the first week of September. And the two authors, one of them is a CIA officer, now retired, and the other one is someone whose father worked for the Foreign Service and has worked and lived in many countries. In 1980, he was the US ambassador to Nicaragua. And so this is someone who's also from the same background. And probably works in his own way, with US intelligence and all of that. And so they're the authors of this book that's pushing this theory. And then they're using that book with their promotional tour to go on all of the streams and all these huge, right-wing podcasts to push this like conspiracy that Venezuela has been tampering with all these elections, including the United States, which is completely absurd, because if that was the case, why would President Maduro elect Daniel Noboa, or enemy of Venezuelans, Nayib Bukele, who literally locked up hundreds of Venezuelans without due process? They were completely sequestered and disappeared there. Why would President Maduro help to get any of these people elected in like most of these countries of Latin America and the Caribbean right now? It just doesn't make any sense. And I'm not going to go as far as to read the book. That would be absurd. But so we've migrated our claims. They are coming up with more and more absurd claims for why they have to go in and remove President Maduro. And at the same time, they're saying that he's begging for his life and asking President Trump to allow him and his family to leave. He could have left ages ago. He can leave anytime he wants. He controls all of the planes and the armed forces in the country. He could literally ask one of these friendly countries to give him a ride somewhere. He doesn't want to leave. If he wanted to leave, he would have left 10 years ago, because that's how long he's been under threat as a president. Prior to that, he was foreign minister and other positions. So he's not going anywhere. He has nothing to be afraid of. And he's going out into public and he's dancing to, these little chavista tunes that they have. And quite frankly, living his best life, probably getting more sleep than he did in previous years when all the other assassination and coup and mercenary attempts and terrorist attacks took place. So, so they're just trying to throw more and more stuff against the government and against Venezuela to mount the pressure. But frankly, it's not working. And their main guy, Maria Corina Machado, is now seemingly on the exterior preparing to receive in person her Nobel Peace Prize in Norway, December 10th. So even she has, what is the basis for which they plan to govern or do anything in Venezuela when the time comes, when both Edmundo Gonzalez, supposedly the guy that was the candidate who they say won the elections, who is a very senior citizen, who is now under like a scheme of elder abuse, having him as the face of this, and Maria Machado are both on the exterior. So it's completely, if it weren't already discredited, it's even more illegitimate to say that these people are supposed to be the leaders of the country.
Oh, absolutely. I remember when they rolled out Edmundo Gonzalez, and I was like trying to find out more and more
Literally rolled
information
him
about this guy and going, wow, this is your guy, right? I mean, I guess not to say that Juan Guaido was anything special, but they at least could be like, look at him. He's got a little bit of CIA training there. But
Well,
now
he was saying the right things. I mean, I do think that there's probably some part of the U.S., government and the people who are behind all of, these coup plots who are missing Guaido, because Guaido wasn't going. He was doing this thing that they sometimes do. The right-wing Latin Americans will go and pretend to be progressive or center left and feminist and all this stuff. To try to, pander to that European and North American audience. But Maria Corina Machado is going out onto these different programs where she speaks English, and she says that she is just ready to take control and sell all of Venezuela's oil to the world as fast as possible to guarantee energy security for the United States and for the Western Hemisphere, which means like the countries and governments that support her or that are closely aligned with the Trump regime. So, she's just saying like just about anything that comes to her mind. She's being at times brutally honest, saying that she's meeting with international business investors, she's attending business forums. It's pretty clear what she's all about. And that's not sitting well with people. And so it's become far too obvious what's going on here. You don't really have to sit around and explain it. People can see it and listen to her for themselves.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I hadn't thought about that. The fact that you have Maria Corina Machado, who is so clearly this establishment puppet, has been for years and years now. And I am curious too, because I noticed in the Western media, you've got CNN declaring that Maduro appears even more isolated this week after losing two regional allies following elections in Honduras and then in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And we know that at least in the case of Honduras, Trump did not make his meddling a secret. He endorsed the far right candidate, threatened the country with consequences if the public did not vote accordingly. So as you look at the region and you look at the fact that they're now having to deal with people like Trump and Marco Rubio, what are your concerns when it comes to kind of the future of US meddling, as they still are looking for it? If they're not bombing Venezuela, they're like, oh, how can we go hop in and meddle in the election over here in Honduras?
I think that the Latin American and Caribbean left are going to have to sit down and analyze everything that's been happening, not just in the last few months, but in the last few years, including before Trump returned to office, and think about how they want to go about approaching elections, because we know that these elections are being meddled in by the United States 100% of the time. And they're doing so often very bluntly, funneling money to multiple candidates, priming multiple candidates, holding meetings in the embassies. And there's just so many people, because of how lucrative that is, who are willing to do that with the same sort of neoliberal agenda. But really, their agenda a lot of times is just whatever the United States wants. And they're happy to propose, opening up the country to, foreign capital and to the return or the increase of US military presence and bases and stuff like that. And so I think people are going to be waking up because of what's happening and realizing that the strategy needs to change a little bit and that the left needs to become a little bit more serious, because President Xiomara Castro has maintained a high level of support for her government. She's done really important things to try to clean up the institutions of the state, and what she called refounding the state or reconstituting the state following 11 years of coup and of a US backed regime. And yet still she's having, the Libre Party looks like they won't be holding on to power, although Rixi Mangala, the candidate, hasn't actually accepted the result and shouldn't. They should understand it to be completely illegitimate at this stage. But we have another very popular president right now in Colombia, and his forces and the people he's allied with are being threatened as well. When we have Ivan Cepeda, who's the candidate for the left in Colombia, who looks certain to win. And what Rixi Moncada said in her exclusive interview with Telesur yesterday was that she believes that what's happening to her in Honduras is the U.S. trying to try a different, method of interfering in elections, so that they can then use that in other countries with upcoming elections, like Colombia, where the left should win. And so, we've had a very difficult time. I say we, but it's not me, but the citizens revolution led by Rafael Correa have had a very difficult time with elections and with winning the narrative within Ecuador with all of this mountain of US interference in that country. And they have been out of office now for going on 9 years, following 10 years of governing where they completely fixed the country in many ways, and had a lot of very important construction of important infrastructure and all sorts of things. So it seems like we're going to have to sit down and have a look at how things are going. Nayib Bukele was reelected again. Obviously, we have Javier Milei in Argentina. There's due to be difficulties in the elections that the PT will be running in when Lula leaves, or maybe Lula will try to run again. But these processes can all be meddled in as well. So it's a very crucial moment. But what's I guess one silver lining is that people are talking to one another. In the Caribbean, we have the Assembly of Caribbean People who put out another strong statement yesterday calling on social movements and civil society to come together once again and take action and do more beyond what's been done, which has been incredible, to reject US interference in the region, to reject US warmongering in the Caribbean, to say we don't want US bases in our countries, and we don't want our leaders lending our countries and our territories to this militarization of the region. And then at the same time, we have Venezuela essentially leading a peace movement. And that's what's happening next week in Caracas. They're due to hold a massive international peace congress for maintaining Latin America and the Caribbean as a zone of peace and those sorts of themes, which the US is trying to make it even more difficult for US citizens to attend. Ironically, again, having to do with travel, they put out that level 4 alert advisory saying that US citizens shouldn't go to Venezuela because it's unsafe, because they might get arrested and stuff like that. And so hopefully with everything that's happening with the airlines, and with people having been questioned while they're traveling, that people from the US do actually make it there, because it's going to be a really important place for people from all around the world to convene and talk about what's happening in our different countries and how we're going to come together and confront it.
Yeah, and I really appreciate the coverage that you're continuing to do of that, right? Showing people not only this part of the world, but also the events that are happening there that the US clearly doesn't want them to see. They don't want people coming together to promote peace, especially at a time when they're trying to sell a war, which they have failed miserably in order to do. And I also appreciate you taking the time to join me today to break down all of the latest here and to give us more insight into what's going on in this region of the world. Camila Escalante, an independent journalist and editor for Kawsachun News, thank you so much for your time and insight.
Thanks for having me again.
If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment, and as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. That's where you'll find ad-free videos and new weekly episodes of my exclusive series for paid subscribers called Sanctioned. You can also check out Sanctioned over on my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Rachel Blevins. As always, thank you all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.